to this track on Quantified Self, Aging and Rehabilitation. My name is Nete Svendesen and I'll be chairing the session. And we have three presentations where we all focus on aging and the use of digital technologies. And it's interesting in itself and also reflects a current situation where technologies are increasingly becoming involved in the process of becoming older and are kind of contribute to define aging and what and processes of aging in itself. Yes, we have 1.5 hours, and we decided that we would do our presentations and then allow a few questions for clarification after each presentation, and then we'll have, hopefully we'll have time for 10-15 minutes in the end where we will have a final discussion on all the three presentations. So I would like to warmly welcome Monica or Mona Buscher from the University of Bremen, who will do a presentation about digital aging.
Okay, thank you, Netta, and hello to you all. I hope to keep you a little awake after that good dinner and don't give you time for sleeping. Okay, I will talk a little bit about something I call digital aging. That means I will present a project I worked in for the last 1.5 years, and then I will focus on 3 aspects and have a little conclusion about something I right now call digital aging. By training, I'm a sociologue and I work in an Institute for Public Health and Nursing. That means I have a certain sociological perspective on aging, which pretty popular approach which is called doing age. It's similar to Doing Gender by Kenneth West and Dawn Zimmerman. That means age is something which is a social performance. Okay, it's like Doing Gender, so aging is something which is a performance and also have social ascriptions. And this concept comes to an end when it comes to fleshy experiences and also to other agencies than humans. So I go to neo-materialism and take Barat into this concept and say that also humans, technologies, but also spaces and maybe animals and a lot of other agencies are involved in a process of aging. So that's just my concept of aging. And today I start with my project. I had the chance the last 1.5 years to work on my postdoc project, and I focused on digital health technologies and their influence on ideas and experiences of aging. So my focus was on people older than 65 years in Germany, where I work. I used a qualitative research design. I did more than 50 interviews, mostly with seniors, people older than 65, but also with their family members, with project administration, with health insurance companies, with public authorities, and all different actors being involved in technical developments for seniors. Also, of course, programmers. And I did participatory observations. I spent hours and hours in the homes of elderly and also in residential homes and in a central station where calls get in from seniors who press the alarm button. So today in this project I concentrated on 3 different technologies, on also fitness apps and home monitoring system for people with chronic conditions. But today I just want to talk about ambient assisted living technologies, smart technologies, which are especially built to enable people to live in their own home, even if they have handicaps. In the sample I will present to you, I have technologies of the first generation, those which need active involvement, like emergency bracelets, and of the second generation, like sensors and cameras and this typical AAL technology. I want to start, maybe I shouldn't give you something to read. I want to start with a perspective of a program director who implements a lot of different AAL projects. And this project I will quote from. He introduces a project which is called Digital Care Journal, and that is especially made for people who want to age in their place and who have handicaps. And a nurse is going to get to a computer and fill in what she or he did every day. And also in the apartment are sensors for movement, infrared sensors, but also sensors if the water was used. This project is made to enhance the care, but also to enable to age in place. So I will read to you what he said. It takes quite a while for the professional care worker to figure out what happened over the last day in the home of the senior. The senior will most likely not let the nurses know that he or she, for example, did fall recently. The sensors and the personal management system enabled the care professionals to download the report of the last 24 hours, and based on this, they can start their work. So we see, obviously, the real hand-on work, hand-on care is privileged in this situation, and the communication between the nurse and the person living in that place is suspended. That's very different to what nurses learn today and try to practice today, where communication is meant to be relationship building and meant to be the basis of a consensual care. So this very right now dominant ideas are suspended to something which we would call hard facts. So what do we learn from that? First, we see, obviously, it's assumed that there is a potential threat to the seniors from the care workers, first. Second, if we take Goffman in, who says we all play a role like in a theater, that if the old people play a role of being a competent housekeeper, that might as well be that they feel like one, and that could have a positive effect. And third would be if the senior does not focus so much on the handicaps, on falling down, but prefers to talk about positive aspects in his or her life, that could have also a positive impact on her or his life. So out of a salutogenetic impact, to talk in the words of Antonovsky, those two forms of communication could have very positive impacts on health. Also, I want to add quotes of nurses I did who actually talk about this program, who their biggest concern is that those technologies in their field would force the consolidation of their work to get more people in smaller amount of times they need to take care of. So they fear that they are trapped first in between their idea of having a good work to do, which means relationship building, consensual care on the one side, and on the other side, needing technologies to be at all enabled to work with so many people in the same time. There's a big ambivalence. And my third point would be that we see that the character of the home is changing, of having the idea of a home, of being a refuge, a place freed from looks. We now see that we have like not just senses, but also other ideas of communication, of care, intruding into this place. and also of having the medical care, having in a space which is called home, changes the character. Of before having the care or medical treatment somewhere else means also I could leave the handicaps and talking about the handicaps at another place. Now this communication about handicaps comes into the own place, the home. Both topics are described as being pretty stressful by the people I interviewed. My second example is taken from an interview with an 84-year-old lady who uses different technologies, but also in this point she talks about a first-generation alarm button. And she really likes this alarm button and uses it, or she had used it several times, falling down, needing help. And at this quote, she puts up a big ambivalence, and that's why I've chosen it, and I will read it to you. From time to time, I get coughing fits. Have had them for years. That make me panic, because I cannot breathe and I fear that. I notice then that there's an emptiness developing in my head. I'm afraid of suffocating. In that situation, I've developed a technique in which I pant in order to get more air gradually. I'm coping with that quite well, and I do not panic anymore. But I still consider the situation quite dangerous at times. Once I was almost about to press the button, but then I hesitated a bit longer. It would have taken the ambulance 20 minutes to get to me, but my brain would have already suffered severe damage in that time. I find that prospect worrying. I'd rather not be there at all. And by my breathing improved, and I was quite glad that I had not raised an alarm unnecessarily. I choose this quote because Hilde, I changed the name, put out a very essential ethical dilemma. As we can see, and probably all know it, that the logic inscribed in these alarm buttons are life-saving in any case. And also we see that the notions of life worth living Hilde has are very different from this. So with these conflicting values, her only way to be self-determined was not to press the button and be alone with her panic and fear. So we see that obviously there is something like participatory design of, like now those emergency buttons changed. Now they're on a smartphone or a pretty bracelet or something like that. But what did not change since the 70s, I guess, the time the emergency buttons were developed, is that they don't reflect values and changing values about a life worth living, and also about medical innovations and the influence on consequences on how life can be expanded. So Hilde told me afterwards that she would never ever use a passive monitor or sensor system, because that means for her the absolute loss of self-determination. So, and my third example is of one of those passive sensors, which is a core-piece of AAL. And this is a woman I called Helen. She has epilepsy, is 70 years old. And she has several sensors and also a sensor in her bed. And I quote, "I still want to blow my top and make love. I don't know whether I should switch it off then, or whether that appears somewhere. These things happen, and there are other open questions. I don't know where to get the answers." So what can we figure from this quote? First of all, we have these discussions of the inability of seniors to deal with digital technologies. I've read some pretty good Dutch studies on home monitoring for chronic conditions, and how this inability develops into risk of mild medication. But in this case, this is the right page. In this case, we see that the devices are not even made that people can change the scripts. So they get installed and adapted to a place, but obviously nobody can mangle with those scripts. And so what we learn about is actually about the images of age of the programmers, which are mostly 30, 40 something, mostly male, mostly white. And obviously we see that sexuality in old age is something which is still a taboo. And if we look at the other technologies, we see that walks at night or activities at night don't fit. There are certain ideas of tidiness, of how to keep a house or a home. And deviations are considered to be mental prostration. So of course, people or seniors avoid certain habits, even if they well loved them, to start new ones. And those could be also dangerous ones. Knowing that, another interview you talked about that, knowing that alarm would go on if she lays in bed more than 3 hours during the day. But she had problems feeling dizzy, and she normally goes to bed. And now she forces herself to get up before the time period of 3 hours is over, because she does not want that the alarm goes on and the others or her family members could know that she was laying down again in the middle of the day. So we know that even before AAL, people developed systems on checking onto each other, of like having agreement with the neighbor of, okay, we pull up the blinds every morning, and if we don't pull up the blinds, something happened. The difference, or the speciality in this case, is it is developed in mutual relationship, it's adapted to certain settings. And the new about AAL is that those technologies bring their own scripts, which can't be mingled with. And the second point is that they send data, and obviously a lot of seniors are not quite sure what data, how it is collected. And the data is sent to unknown people, and what happens with the data is sometimes not clear to them neither. To us, maybe neither also. So interviews describe that as the undermining of individual privacy, or potential. I will come to a conclusion. I want to sum up some rationales about digital aging. As Garvin Smith said in the last session, that health technologies, and that's what we could find here also, is that they're based on a risk model. And under such a perspective, a lot of habits become problematic. Another word about the ideals of aging. The sociologue Silke van Dijk, she wrote a very good book on how images of aging changed due to changement of retirement funds, to cultural, social arrangements. And nowadays, obviously, we know that all, we have this ideal of successful aging, which means aging needs to be productive and effective. It should happen in our own home with most autonomy possible. And we see and know that AAL actually enables but also fosters those ideas of successful aging. But if we look around, we see that having a home and having the health and the opportunities, time-wise and money-wise, to have those social technical practices is itself a privilege. The second is we know that those new obligations or possibilities hit much harder those people who had in their second life phase, like in their working time period between 20 and 65, whatever, no experience with digital technologies. That's the working class people and the war generation, which will have it a lot harder to now deal with digital technologies. And to put on a feminist perspective, as Barb and me just discussed, the idea of a home is connected to this ideal of the nuclear family and also of gender stereotypes of the woman to have unpaid labor to take care of her husband, which to a higher percentage will leave her being alone in this home, needing help, needing to compensate her own deficits on her own. So to finish, we see that age is something which is very heterogenic, and one-size-fits-all solutions like AAL won't work. So I claim that they potentially expand social inequalities. I want to finish with that. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thanks very much for coming. I'm presenting on behalf of also my co-author Stephen Katz, who couldn't be with us today. But this is what I want to do today is a bit of an overview of a new project that we are embarking on, and suggest why we need to think about aging in relation to self-tracking, in relation to metric culture. And I think that we need to think beyond the digital divide, which has really shaped the way we've talked about aging and technologies, why older people are less likely to use them, whatever. And instead, what we really want to focus on here is digital technologies that quantify aging, both as they track health measures and as they create new standards that that define sort of older, health literate subjects, responsible aging citizens. And in doing so, we focus on two illustrative examples, wearable digital fitness trackers and digital brain games. So I'll touch on both of those technologies. So key to these explorations, as we've argued in previous work, is the reconceptualization of aging bodies as measurable and manageable according to a logic of functionality. And we've argued, I've put the reference there if anyone's interested in following up, but we've argued that an earlier emphasis on normality, the sort of normal pathological distinction, has really been supplanted by a functional, dysfunctional distinction. And this is important to metric culture because functionality doesn't require any correlate of normality. And in fact, what's statistically normal may be deemed dysfunctional in health enhancement initiatives. And in previous work, we've demonstrated that with respect to, say, sexuality in later life. Above all, functional states are quantifiable states. They can be stabilized as endpoints for understanding and evaluating interventions. And these get materialized through a whole range of instruments and knowledges and practices that support aging individuals in practices in projects of self-care. Technologies aimed at enhancement and improvement of functionality are really endowing aging bodies with an expansive plasticity. And that's what I want to try and think about in terms of the two examples that we're focusing on here. So we've been hearing a lot about wearable tracking technologies over the last couple of days. And wearable tracking devices take on a different character in relation to aging populations. And I'm happy to talk about some of the empirical stuff on that afterwards if anyone's interested. But I'll focus on kind of the higher level overview now. Certainly the public health promotion, public health initiatives are promoting not only activity, but avoidance of inactivity, the kind of anti-sedentary movements, and promoting these as anti-aging strategies. Researchers in kinesiology and preventative medicine who are using fitness trackers as interventions with at-risk older people are treating things like number of steps as proxy measures of success. But new benchmarks are also emerging for that in terms of that anti-sedentary program, suggesting that, for example, and this is from the Public Health Agency of Canada, dictates, and I quote, that older adults should accumulate at least 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensive aerobic physical activity per week in bouts of 10 minutes or more. So this has become a new, and these are really separate things, right? The daily accumulative step total and the number of active minutes are really going to two separate measures, right? One is an anti-sedentary one and one is a cumulative activity one. So the biosensors of wearable devices then provide, kinds of measures that feed into these metrics. In addition, many popular trackers are now, in even the lower end Fitbits, like the kind of entry-level Fitbits, are starting to provide continual measurement of heart rate. And this is seen to quantify both effort on a daily basis, but also an overall sort of health status in terms of resting health rate. And this is one thing I found in the pilot study I just finished, was that the people that I was interviewing were far more interested on an ongoing basis on their heart rate than their step count. Step count was something they looked at every day and then put it aside. They didn't track it over time. But heart rate, and in particular their resting heart rate, was seen as a kind of proxy measure of age. So the data produced by these devices is linked to the biomedical calculation of risk. And not just current health risk, but I think more importantly, future health risks. So tracking and materializing and digitizing risk factors so that you can modify behavior in the present in the process of managing a successful aging process. So fitness trackers in this sense take on a rather unique positioning in relation to aging bodies and aging populations, if we want to think of this as a kind of biopolitical question, and one that gets focused on health and risk management rather than, as we've seen in some of the other presentations, the emphasis on kind of agency and self-knowledge that is attached to younger people. So these are just a couple of statements from industry insiders, as they're called, industry analysts. So using a Fitbit or similar device makes monitoring one's health as part of a lifestyle. And it's that linking of fitness tracking to healthy aging lifestyles that I think should make it of particular interest to social scientists, because sociologists have looked at lifestyle in a different way than, say, exercise scientists or behavioral scientists do, where lifestyle is a kind of collection of rational practices that one may choose to adopt. And instead, as this quote from my colleague Stephen Katz suggests, there's a more critical and sociological sense in which lifestyle represents a very complicated series of spaces where individual agency and social structure can join in such a way that actually comes to define aging and construct aging in contemporary societies. So we want to emphasize the ways that social conditions and political priorities and the authority of experts can join in this way to shape the embodied experience of age. And in doing so, we suggest that wearable fitness tracking technologies and aging bodies get linked in three emergent ways that are relevant to projects of quantifying functionality. And the first, of course, is just in the production of biodata. And this is both the graphic and the quotation here are from Viva Metrica, which is a data analytics firm, Canadian data analytics firm. who claim that wearable activity monitors produce more biometric data than the combined public health surveys of every nation on the planet. And this is in very important ways shaping the kinds of ways that the aging society itself gets conceptualized. So if any of you haven't seen it yet, Tiago Moreira has just produced a really excellent book on the aging society and how aging is produced as a problem, how aging societies are produced as a problem, that I'd highly recommend related to this kind of question. Second, while wearable tracking technologies are increasingly called upon as solutions to the challenges of aging, they also contribute to new ways of embodying age and also distinguishing between aging bodies and other bodies. So we want to think about and raise questions about how the data produced by wearable tracking devices produces these kinds of divisions between young and old and independent and dependent and fit and frail and so on. This replication of bodies into those that are risk averse and those that are risk prone. So there's this division in the current, and this is in both the marketing but also in the current research on digital wearable technologies, tends to replicate this divide between sort of younger, active, independent practices and the market for assisted ambient living, where the emphasis is on surveillance. It's not on agency, it's not on self-knowledge. So this is from the marketing for a technology called Lively. It looks very much like Tempo. It looks very much like any kind of fitness tracker, but instead of this promoting the kind of self-knowledge that we see with other devices, here someone else can see that mom has made 6 visits to the bathroom today as compared to only 3 yesterday, and make that of at will. And finally, as physical activity gets continually promoted as an anti-aging strategy, activity governance, as I said, is now being extended to the governance of inactivity, measurement of inactivity, and the development of disciplinary strategies in response to that. So this becomes like a kind of moral question, right? That indicates irresponsibility and grounds an intensified ethical imperative for aging bodies to move, to be active, to be tracked. So all 3 of these developments promote, through the power of quantification, through the authority of the data produced, the potential optimization of aging bodies and the promise of extended independence, extended agency into later life, and even in some cases of longevity itself. And in this way, and as I'm going to argue for the next technology we look at, there's a really strong congruence of age discourses of physical and mental health with the new technological spaces of digital engagement. So, cognitive health status is now being added to other health statuses, physical, sexual, and so on, as indicating successful aging, and evidenced by a growing focus on brain care in the lifestyle literature. And this is all acting as a kind of public pedagogy to educate readers, the language of brain-boosting foods and vitamins and daily exercises and optimization of mental workouts. So most of us in the West live in cultures inundated with advice about maintaining our brain health, about preventing memory loss related to aging. And this is despite the fact that there is absolutely no consistently recognized way of measuring cognitive fitness. It's become a kind of empty category. But cognitive fitness has now become a really key discursive element in quantifying technologies around memory games, around brain games, around apps that seek to track both current brain performance and promise improvement, and even promise you protection against age-related decline. Cognitopolitics has become a key part also of population risk and governance of aging populations. 2009, the American National Institutes of Health spent about 20% of its total budget on brain-related projects. So the brain has become really central to the management of health and aging populations. Scientific researchers tell us that this is, there's really a lot of metaphor here about, this neuroscientific frontier. There's not a lot of evidence to support the sense that we can. It's not as the idea of brain plasticity is a poorly understood but very attractive idea, that the brain can change itself and that this plasticity can become another mark of successful aging. And this gets, you can see the language that's used to promote this. You get this whole list of positive plasticity words: rewiring, rebooting, recovering, retraining, reserving, as opposed to the prefixes of D that are usually associated with aging: decline, decrepitude, degeneration, dementia, and finally being deceased. So we get this image of the plastic brain as a muscle, just like the muscles you're exercising with, as you get those steps in and get your heart rate up. This image of the plastic brain as muscle really permeates the whole neurocultural commercial field of cognitive device. What? Oh. Okay. Will it come back up?
Yeah, we should come back.
Oh, look at that. And right in the right spot, too. Okay. So we've got this image as this, plastic brain as muscle that really permeates the neurocultural commercial field of cognitive advice with neurostimulants and neuroprotectors. Brain boosting programs. So some of you may have heard of things like Brain Age and Happy Neuron, brain gym memberships, gyms and spas like Mind Spa. And this is a hugely lucrative field. It's, again, they forecast this is going to be about a $6 billion market by 2020. As with physical fitness training and its measurement, brain training becomes based mainly on recent neuroscientific findings that the brain isn't so much a blank slate as it used to be. The old model was the brain was kind of a blank slate or a computer processing center. And now it's more like a muscle that can undergo, it can atrophy or you can strengthen it. Brad Millington's a very interesting UK writer who's written about that. If you're interested, I'm happy to give you references. So for example, we have Vibrant B, which is promoted as a health club for your brain. It boasts where the sweat is figurative, but where the results are real. So you get, again, this rallying cry, as we saw with the quantification of physical activity earlier, use it or lose it. The assumption here is that physical aging will be accompanied by cognitive decline unless you do something about it, unless you take steps to work on this. We heard that for sexuality and aging, for physical activity and aging, this sort of whole use it or lose it. So in reality, even where brain games and memory products might be fun to use, they're not necessarily related to cognitive fitness or even to brain plasticity. Most of the assessments of brain training games, brain games, have shown that they make you better at playing game training games. That's, that's really what they do. But as with other anti-aging technologies, they extend this ambiguous image of the aging body as both positive and improvable, but also negative and inevitable. So benefits are rather rhetorical. And as with things like Fitbit standards and scores, they are really linked to the constructions of the manufacturers themselves who build in. So for example, the Fitbit coming baked in with that 10,000 step goal, the product manufacturers themselves construct the standards of success. And this makes it very hard to assess, and as George and Whitehouse say, that testing a brain fitness video game or computer program is a lot easier than testing a social intervention. So the connection between cognitive politics and quantifying games and technologies of cognitive fitness really lies with the public anxiety about aging and dementia. So the dire consequences of a growing aging population are headlined in the media with apocalyptic images of tides and tsunamis and storms and bombs and zombie scenarios, and and the fear of dementia has become as explosive as the number of diagnoses for it. So for aging individuals who choose not to buy into the promise of brain work, there's the threat of stigmatization as vulnerable to cognitive decline, poor health outcomes, and entry into the fourth age. Just as those who refuse to remain physically active and remain sedentary can also be tarred with that kind of stigmatization. So just to sum up, I've tried to just highlight here some questions which are being raised in our current research on the tracked quantified smart body in digital culture, and in particular about how this body is central to understanding aging in the contemporary landscape where technology, health, consumerism, and risk intersect. So I've just given two examples here of the ways with which aging bodies have been reconceptualized as measurable, manageable, and optimizable in function. These don't exhaust the field. We're still also tracking some work on sexual technologies that we've been working on for a long time. I'm also looking at some things like menopause apps that are, helping you find out when you become reproductively old. But I think these two technologies, the fitness trackers and the brain games, are one way of opening up some of the questions that we're hoping will we can encourage other people to pursue as well. So the digital tracking of both physical and mental activity, I think, really enjoin uses of these technologies to generate measures, to monitor progress, to find meaning about themselves, their bodies, their health statuses in assemblages of data. But both are really rooted in, as Mona suggested, cultural anxiety about aging and the derision of old age or the fourth age that makes strategies to avoid it so compelling. So we hope to encourage other researchers as well to take up some of the critical questions around the impact of quantifying assemblages on bodily and embodied aging. Evelyn Rupert and Mike Savage suggest that the devices central to digital culture are those that track the doing subject. And the doing subject is also central to contemporary agendas of active aging and to constructions of the ethical aging subject. So as we've suggested, successfully aging bodies are no longer just busy bodies, but they're busier, smarter bodies. And we suggest that these technologies described here are part of an expanding biosocial order that integrates populational surveillance, agential apologies such as active aging, and marketable DIY health products, and the production of risk-averse social strata. But at the same time, we're reminded that as they engage with these technologies, older people themselves are contributing to the constitution and the recalibration of age and age-related characteristics, or to the reshaping of age itself as a social and cultural category. So just a quick thank you to my funders, and of course thank you to my co-author Stephen, who would have loved to be here today but can't be. So thank you.
Thank you. I think this presentation by Barbara Marshall is a very nice kind of general speech about what's going on, or the general context, which is important to have in mind when I am presenting this study. I study the processes through which self-tracking technologies become involved and taken up by the healthcare sector and contribute to the transformation of healthcare practices. And I would like to, in this presentation, present you with my ethnographic work, where I have followed the process of implementation of a self-tracking technology called IQRA, which is used for physical rehabilitation of patients who have undergone hip replacement surgery. The title has changed a little bit from when I sent it in my abstract. It's a manuscript that I have been working on for quite a while, and it is actually published or will be published in Digital Health if anyone is interested. So, when self-tracking travels into the context of physical rehabilitation, the aim and functionality of self-tracking transforms. While studies on QS members describe self-tracking as a vehicle for cultivating self-reflexivity and mindfulness, self-tracking becomes a means for moving and restoring disordered bodies. Moreover, self-trackers in physical rehabilitation engage in self-tracking not as a self-generated practice, but in response to professional encouragement and advice, constituting what Deborah Lupton has called pushed self-tracking. But in my presentation, I will emphasize that in contrast to the image of pushing as a single activity where one has the authority to push the other in certain ways, I shall argue that the push is perhaps better described as an ongoing and contingent process of socio-material encounters in complex arrangements of care, which is distributed in time and space and which evolve through affective encounters. So a little bit of context through my study, of the context of my study, which is the Danish welfare state. So as Denmark faces the current economic challenges of demographic aging, as we do in many countries in Europe and throughout the world, the development and investment in new and more cost-effective modes of care delivery has been high on the political agenda. IQRA is constituted as one possible solution that promises to make processes of physical rehabilitation more cost-efficient and at the same time delivering better quality of care. And this process contributes to a Danish imaginary future where Denmark is able to transform knowledge and welfare services to digital and innovative solutions and become part of the leading countries on the global market of welfare technologies, hereby sustaining the welfare state in the future. In this talk, I will illustrate how IQRA do not fix problems but may create new troubles and new problems, and throughout the transformation of care in physical rehabilitation. So IQRA, the technology that I'm investigating, is a smartphone application with 5 sensors that monitor bodily movement. And the 5 sensors have to be worn by the patient during training and has to be attached to the body with Velcro rubber bands, 2 on each leg and 1 around the stomach. The sensors translate knowledge and bodily movement into digital feedback and guidance, which emerges immediately after each exercise in the form of a digital voice, correcting the person who is doing the exercise It could say, for instance, lift your right knee to a higher position, and stars. The patient can have up to 3, which appear on the smartphone interface after each training session. So in order to provide efficiency in training, various elements of standardization are integrated in the system, such as templates with training programs and the function of auto-progression, which means that the system will automatically progress with new and more demanding exercises when a number of exercises are completed and assessed as correct. The data on bodily movement is stored in a program which both the patient and the healthcare professional have access to, and the data illustrates which exercises have been done and indicate with a color whether the exercises were done well, which is green, not well, which is red, or in between, which is yellow. In the last year, ICURA has reconfigured physical rehabilitation in time and space, whereas previously physical rehabilitation was organized around an 8-week span, during which patients had to attend group training at the rehabilitation center 1 hour twice a week. ICURA has now legitimated a substitution of one of the weekly training sessions, so that patients only will have to attend training at the center once a week instead of twice. So there's this idea of substitution. And whereas guided training in previous programs of rehabilitation was located in a clinical setting and articulated through relationships between health professionals and practice, ICURA is delegated the role of providing guidance in the home of patients, which is articulated through relationships between the patients and the device. So in this ongoing ethnographic study, I have participated in startup conversations where health professionals present patients with ICURA, and I've participated in training sessions at the rehabilitation center. I've interviewed health professionals, I've interviewed patients in their homes and done observations of their home training, and I have done some interviews with representatives from a company. The presentation is based on one rehabilitation center in Copenhagen municipality. I'm now doing the same research on another rehabilitation center, which actually tells another story. But I will comment on that, I'll comment on that at the very end. Okay, and I will present you a case from my material which illustrates some of the dynamics that plays out when authority and responsibility is delegated to ICURA. So this is Sophie, and she is just about to turn 70. She lives alone in a flat at 4th floor. She has 4 children and 5 grandchildren. And for many years, she had 2 jobs in order to earn enough for a living, but she retired a few years ago. She describes herself as a fighter that never gives up, even though life sometimes can be tough. And I met Sophie at the rehabilitation center 3 weeks after she underwent hip replacement surgery, and I visited her in her home 1 week after. Sophie expresses that she is really happy that she is allowed to do home training with ICURA, which means that she will only have to attend training sessions once a week. While she's not able to attend the rehabilitation center by herself in her current condition, she has to wait for the municipal transportation system to drive her, which most of the time involves many hours of waiting. In that sense, ICURA promises independency and flexibility by allowing her to do guided training at home. So when I met Sophie, she had difficulties in moving around in her home and conduct everyday tasks such as getting dressed or go to the toilet, and she could only walk with the help of a crutch. She trusts, though, that if she follows the guidance of ICURA, her body will quickly be transformed and restored and become as mobile as it was before undergoing the surgery. She explains how the professional's ability to follow her training from a distance induce a form of bad conscience in situations where she's not able to follow the plan. But she rarely fails to do her daily training, which makes her proud. During training with ICURA, Sophie makes herself available to the authority of ICURA by continually trying to adjust her movements when the digital voice corrects her. She, however, experienced a gap between her movements and the ways in which the digital voice responded to her, which frustrated her. And that's the first quote. He says that I have to stretch the knee, but I cannot stretch the goddamn knee more than I already do. See, I can get so angry with him. He just tells me off. I can't stretch it anymore. Isn't that right? But on the other hand, she perceives Akira as a friend that helps her and supports her in doing her training at home. That's the second quote. Sometimes he just doesn't know what he's talking about. But he has also helped me. If it wasn't for Akira, I wouldn't have trained so much. He keeps me on my feet. As such, she is affected by the response from Akira. She gets happy when she receives 3 stars and positive, and no corrections by the digital voice, and she gets frustrated when it corrects her. So the affective activity at stake points to affect as residing in the relationship between technologies and bodies, and that is, so rather than an innate response, affect was the result of flows between a body and a technology. So I met Sophie 2 weeks later at the Rehabilitation Center, and she tells me that she has been in terrible pain. Especially the hip that did not undergo surgery had started to hurt. And a few weeks later, I talked to the professionals at the center, and they told me that Sophie was now referred to undergo hip replacement surgery on the other hip, the healthy hip. And Sophie explains to me that she believes that it was the training that caused the injury. So while we cannot presume that her explanation is that straightforward, the developers of Akira recognize that there is a risk that the patients become what they call over-compliant and that they start training too much when using Akira. So the story of Sophie indicates that there is a misalignment between the temporality of bodily progress inscribed in Akira and the transformation of Sophie's body. The term rehabilitation enacts a specific vision of bodily movement. It invokes a linear vision of transformation where a present body of misfit is imagined to be transformed into a past body of fit by undergoing various restoring interventions that promises transformation. A body that undergoes rehabilitation after hip replacement surgery will most often gradually transform into a more mobile body, but the time frame and the extent to which this happens is uncertain. As such, the process of physical rehabilitation can be characterized as a process of uncertainty which do not transform bodies in a linear process of progress. In the case of Sophie, the linear temporality of Akira and the more cyclical and unpredictable temporality of a body were not aligned, which resulted in bodily pain and a broken body. So during the 1-hour training sessions that I participated in, many patients complained about physical pain and expressed insecurity on how to strike the right balance between bodily progression and pain. They also complained that Akira kept correcting them even though they made everything possible to make it satisfied, as shown by the case of Sophie. A response that was most often used among the health professionals was that Akira was fattesvag, which is a term that they used to describe Akira as not very bright. In this process, the health professionals deauthorized Akira as a proxy or stand-in for the health professionals and gave authority to the patients to judge by themselves how to strike the right balance between bodily progression and pain. However, for many patients, this was not experienced as a careful response to their experienced problems. They felt that they were left alone with an impossible task of deciding themselves when to follow Akira's guidance and when not, how much pain they should allow before they stop training, the frequency of training, etc., without any previous experience to draw on. The patients also experienced that actually the professionals did not check up on their movement data and that they did not relate to them during the weekly training sessions at the center. And paradoxically, patients actually desired to be controlled and looked after by the health professionals. And even though Akira allowed health professionals to observe patients training from a distance, Akira was rarely used as a tool for surveillance and control. In this sense, neither the professionals nor Akira acted as expected, and the patients lost trust in both. And many patients started to exercise without using Akira, and some even hired a private therapist to guide their training progress. In these situations, Akira was not able to engage and affect neither the patients nor the health professionals in the practice of self-tracking, and therefore became a worthless object without any meaning or functionality. So in her paper, the French philosopher of science, Vinciane Desprez, I don't know if anybody know her, the paper is called The Body We Care For and is from 2004. She makes a distinction between bodies that are docile and bodies that make themselves available for transformation. In doing so, she distinguishes between a caretaker and a judge or a master. And she argues that a caretaker is someone who's interested in the possible becoming of another actor and allows itself to be transformed through a process of attunement. In the case of Sophie, her body became a docile body as she continued to do her exercises under the guidance of Aikura, which transformed her body into a broken body in pain. Aikura did not make itself available for transformation, but was regulated by an algorithmic automatization, which was not attuned to the temporality of her specific body. Aikura was only able to respond to individual bodies in situations where they progressed as planned and not in situations where bodies might have benefited from slowing down or having a break from training in order to perhaps regain its physical condition. So while the vision of Aikura is to motivate patients and to constitute a temporal reordering of the process of physical rehabilitation in order to make it more cost efficient, I have illustrated that Aikura is not able to make bodies move by itself. In contrast to the image of pushing as a single activity where one actor, technology or the health professional has the authority to push the other, the patient, to act in certain ways, I argue that the push is better described as an ongoing and contingent process that evolves through affective and affecting encounters between humans and non-human actors. As such, the working of Aikura and its ability to transform bodies in processes of physical rehabilitation is enabled through a wider arrangement of care, which constitute the functionality of Aikura as either a competent or an incompetent stand-in for the health professional. So if we think with Desprez and her notion of a caretaker as someone or something who makes itself available for transformation, I will argue that health professionals are potentially able to transform Aikura into a at least more competent and responsible stand-in for the health professional. There's a variety of templates that have been made to account for different bodies. The speed of auto-progression can be adjusted and, for instance, only connect to specific exercises. And there's a chat function which is built into the device through which a patient could potentially get into contact with the health professionals. But these functionalities were never introduced or used. Also, the professionals could use the data about the patient's home training as a dialogue tool that could make them better able to guide them and adjust the composition of the exercise program to specific bodies. However, such work could have been done by health professionals in order to articulate a relationship of fit between the temporality of Aikura and specific bodies. But such adjustment work takes time and a willingness to tinker with the technology itself in order to reshape it. As such, what made Aikura to transform into an incompetent stand-in for the health professional were not decided only by the technology itself, but by the very premise of the introduction of Aikura into physical rehabilitation, that it was a device whose main functionality was to save time and lower the cost per person undergoing physical rehabilitation. In order to accommodate that aim, functionalities of automatization and standardization was built into Aikura, which paradoxically seemed to create an even stronger need for adjustment and differentiation. So that was it. Is there any clarifying?
I have a clarifying question. Aikura, who owns Aikura and how did they react to your criticisms?
It's a private company. But Aikura were actually developed in through funds for public-private relationships innovation, which is supported by the government in Denmark. But it's a private company who solves the solution to Danish municipalities, and they are actually they are very interested in the results and would very much like to listen to the research that I have found, and they would like it to be as they define it themselves as a technology that is based on user development but what is interesting is and also what I said that I would comment on is that it actually at the other rehabilitation center Accurate turns out to be something else because and also I'm an actor in the whole process of implementation, and I've also of course presented this to the health professionals and to the representative from the municipality, and they have become aware that it is that you need to relate to Accurate during the training sessions, that you cannot continue as you did before, and you have to ask about what are the experiences, what have your experiences been when you trained alone, and what, do you have any doubts, any questions, etc., etc. But it also revealed a transformation of professional practice and ideals, where physiotherapy is about getting people to move, and they have to sweat as a kind of a sign of efficiency, but now they have to kind of talk to the patients and try to make them able to react in constructive ways in their home training with the device. So they have to change the whole idea of how to be a good professional. So that takes time, but I see it has changed at the other rehabilitation center. And they really go and look for the result and whole the time try to present them for the patients and ask, and but it's 1 hour with up to 10 participants, so there's not much time, so that's also the time is also like an obstacle in that sense.
Can I say a little thing about that, because I think it's a very nice example of how unrealistic these technology developers are, that they think that they can actually do away the people, and then they realize if they are clever enough to listen to the critique, they realize that they actually still need the people, but they need to think about the organization of work in a different way. And
and that is what happens now, and it's also about developing more realistic business cases, because the business cases right now, which is the basis of the decisions of introducing new technologies, they don't value or put numbers or money into the work by the health professional that they have to do, the invisible work that is kind of the whole that makes it work or not. So yeah. Is there no more comments on my presentations? We should have
the panel.
And we've just been asked to stand up too.
Yeah.
So I want to just pick up on that, if I can jump in before we go. And I think Mena's raised something that's really the unspoken in all of this, is the austerity agenda that shapes all of these technologies around aging. It's not so much the morality of neoliberalism as it is how can we do this cheaper and at less cost.
There's really a hype about the technologies and what they can do.
Well, and they try to sell it with the independence and the shininess of technology, but it's really about austerity. I think. To be blunt.
Kind of following on from that point in a way, I was interested in, have you thought about how people are maintained in their home? You talked about ageing in place, your example of your research participant who was doing her exercise at home. Were there any disadvantages to that came out? So she said it was convenient not to have to travel to the therapist or to the gym, but she was being kept at home and then missing out on those social opportunities. Did that come out at all in your...
Yeah, that's definitely. All the participants valued to have training at the centers and value to go there at least once a week. They didn't want to dismiss that. And it's very obvious that if they are allowed to talk to each other and exchange experience, it's very valuable to them. So,
and also that the physical activity of getting out of the house and going to somewhere
Yeah.
is something that you want to be able to do with your body,
Yeah.
which may be more useful than being able to lift your leg 10 times. I mean, there's that angle of it as well. Is that something that?
yeah. It is interesting how we have a transportation system in Denmark which is not very flexible. So this, in a sense, becomes a solution. The promise of independence becomes a kind of solution to that problem, to her experience of that problem. But instead of, we could also perhaps think about how we could make the whole transportation system more flexible. That could also be another kind of solution. Yeah. So.
Why do you think that the solution that is put together, that is put forward, is the first one, not the second one? Do private companies have a lot of impact on that, on the policies?
I think there's a really huge belief in what technology is actually able to do. And this image of developing an intelligent trainer that can substitute the physiotherapeutic work at the same time as promising independency and flexibility. Yeah, that's really a very strong narrative that's difficult for them actually to argue against. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was really nice how the papers talk to each other, and I was thinking about how you're all kind of talking about this sort of transformation of the notion of health and the aging when it comes to it. It becomes very narrow. So and actually that we see also in terms of younger people, that all of a sudden health becomes vitality and activity, and all the kind of social determinants of health kind of disappear,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're catering to this very, very narrow notion. But then, on the other hand, when the users come in, then it doesn't work.
No.
So you have this very, there's a huge tension there.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you all very much for your papers. I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question. One clarifying question that leads into my question, I suppose, is Barbara, you mentioned that it's going to be a 6 billion industry by 2020. And that made me think, what exactly is this industry? So where does the industry begin and end? What kind of companies, what kind of business activities fit into, say, digital aging? Or
Well, but that's just for the brain training stuff.
the
The brain
yes.
games, brain gyms, brain spas, all the language of digital brain training. And I think there was one little clip up there with, I mean, like the data produced by Fitbits, you can store it, you can share it, you can graph it, you can show, change over time. And it all goes to that idea of plasticity.
Yeah.
And it's very appealing. It's commercially very appealing. It's not enough to do, Sudoku anymore. That's just crosswords. Those are just really old school.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's that $6 billion figure just comes from, and who knows how accurate that is. You get the industry insiders are always claiming this. Let's just say a lot of people are interested in putting a lot of money into that sector.
Yeah. So do you know if anyone is studying or researching that at the moment, the industry side of things in terms of its size and its relation? And that I guess feeds into the question I wanted to ask you in terms of, because you spoke both to the company and the physiotherapy clinic, following up on the previous question as well. I'm really interested in how the relation between the manufacturer or however you would call it, digital health companies, and the clinics and the sort of traditional health providers is created, if there is any interaction in there. And now there are new stakeholders being introduced into these health practices, what their influence is and how that influence is maybe evolving over time. Because it all sounds like it could be good intentions, and then there's the profit dimension of it, but there's also, as it were, new forms of relationality between private and non-private or both private entities that is really going to be, or is already,
very much framing the experience and the outcomes of whatever health practices we are concerned with. So, if any of you, have you looked at that dynamic sort of outside of the patient, but the different institutions and how they relate to each other?
We're starting to, that's in our plan for, we're just starting a 5-year project on this, and that's in the plan. But one of the things that I think is probably the case almost everywhere now is if you look at the push for public-private partnerships in academia, in institutions, and we just put in a part of a grant with some European countries where their funders insisted that there be a private partner involved. So it really muddies the waters when you get that built, like baked in right from the start in terms of, and in Canada we have a big thing called Age Well, which is a public-private thing around aging, but it's intensely focused on development of these kinds of technologies that,
And it's hard not to get co-opted in that, I suppose. If you do research like you, it could either be a critique of the notion of technologizing care, or it could be seen as, oh, this is how we can improve Akira. We just have to be careful that we don't overtrain them, and then we can adjust it. So
adjust the algorithm.
It'd be a difficult balance for you to strike as well.
Yeah, that's true, and I am kind of caught into that dilemma all the time. Because I go with the Akira solution. I don't see other solutions, or about the public-private relationship, I can tell a little bit about it from the Akira case. Then actually the health consultant, which is employed by the company, was actually employed by another municipality. She was a physiotherapist there and engaged in this development project funded by public-private funds, relationship funds. And then she moved from the municipality to the company, and so the boundaries are blurry. And now she's actually offering her help as a consultant to the municipalities. There's a hotline where both users, patients, and health professionals can call her all the time, and she offers her help and advice in how to make it more usable. Also, there's continuously development of the algorithms and different exercises, and they try all the time to adjust the professional and the patient needs, how they express them. So they definitely see each other as colleagues, I would say.
And I would say it's the same for Germany. You just get funding if you have companies, scientists, and a big group of different actors, and you always need to have a sociolog in this group, because you need somebody to make little corrections. Right. So it's the ideal that you have somebody reflecting those ideas. So you actually realize as a sociolog that they will do their thing, and you can just maybe correct a little bit, but what you have as a general criticism won't be of any interest in those corporations.
Well, thank you for 3 great speeches. I was very inspired by your speech, Monica, about elderly people and how the objective data and the elderly persons need to construct their aging, how the health professionals dealt with this kind of, looking into data and still maybe talking to the person about something different, constructed differently. I don't know if you understand. If you have any reflections on how the health professionals or the social workers in the home, how they dealt with that different perspectives.
Good question. In general, talking to nurses about digital developments in care, I guess there are 2 threats. The one threat is that they will need to have a new job of like a sitting in a call center and giving advice over the phone, like being completely detached from the actual care work. And the other one is that their organization of their work will change, because now they can consolidate their work and even having more cases in the same time than they have already. So that's a big threat they see. And in this case, they developed, or two of them developed, a way on still talking to the patients or to the senior, because just starting to touch the senior did disrupt the relationship, of course. So they developed new ways on avoiding actually downloading the notions of the nurse from yesterday. But they found it very difficult to download the informations while the senior was in the same room, because the senior didn't knew what was written on the computer, so they showed the information to the senior. But they got in very weird situations. So they tried other ways to communicate, to develop a new relationship. But they said it's very stressful for them to integrate into their routines.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting panel. Actually, I'm quite new in this field about aging and technology, but as I am rooted in communication and media, I found Monica's notion about how the role of communication actually changed quite interesting, from the communication in the healthcare was changing from this interaction focused on building up a relationship towards a more functionalistic approach. And that made me actually quite curious whether you have also noticed anything about how communication is changing, because I think you have a very important point pointing to the need for taking into consideration the whole organizational framework around these technologies, and this will also imply the role of communication on many levels, as I could just imagine it. But there's a broad question to you, how you see the communication, and whether the technology changes the communication in between the users and the technology, and how the whole communicative framework around the use of these technologies.
Well, yeah, that absolutely accords with what we have seen as this emphasis on functionality as opposed to normality. Because the measurability of functionality, quantification, it's used as a measure of how successful an intervention is, and that shapes the communication between professionals and clients. Is how measurable is the outcome? How can we see where the goal is and functioning? And yeah, I think that really shifts the quality of communication.
And I would say at the same time, what I see is that it is actually transforming. They kind of they see now a need for developing a relationship to the iCura and to the inscribed visions of bodily progression. They have to tingle with that. So in a sense, I think they actually find out that they have to do the same as they have been done previously, but now taking an extra actor into consideration, which makes the whole communication much more complicated, because who's going to have authority? Who should the patient listen to? The iCura, or what the physiotherapist says, or what the patient feels in her body.
Did I understand you correctly when you were giving the quotes from Sophie that she actually called it he?
Yes.
Like she gendered it?
Yeah.
So there's that kind of anthropomorphizing of the device as well.
So clear, so clear. They really buy into this whole idea of an intelligent substitute.
Yeah.
They relate to that as someone who can help them in doing exercises. So, yeah. that's complicates the whole matter. But I won't say that it definitely implicates a tendency towards functionality only. Because over time, the health professional find out that okay, you have to relate to this and you have to adjust it so it fits with the body, different bodies. Yeah, in that sense, you have to be empathetic and etc. etc. You just have to now design the technology so that it fits with the bodies. Yeah. Is there any
Time for coffee break?
yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.